The night sky was full of fire when the ship fell. Metal screamed as it broke apart. A human woman named Claire was thrown against her seat, her body shaking as alarms shouted in her ears. The controls were dead, the engines were gone, and the blackness of space gave way to the red surface of a strange world. The crash was like thunder. Her ship tore through rock and dust before coming to rest in a broken valley. Claire's head rang with pain, but she forced her eyes open. Sparks danced around her, smoke rose from the broken panels, and the air was heavy with the smell of burned wires. She pulled herself free from the straps. Her legs shook as she stumbled. Across the tilted floor, the emergency lights flickered, showing shadows that seemed alive. Her voice cracked as she whispered to herself. I survived, but the silence around her felt heavier than death. Outside the broken door, a desert stretched to the horizon. The sky was a strange color, neither day nor night, a dull red glow that made the world look wounded. Her hands trembled as she picked up a small pack and stepped out into the dust. The wind cut at her skin, dry and sharp, carrying no sound except her own breath. She turned back to the wreck. It was broken beyond repair, smoke rising like a signal to nowhere. No one would come for her, she realized. No beacon would reach across the stars. She was alone, utterly alone on this dying planet. Hours passed as she searched the wreck. She found a little water, a ration bar, and a broken flare. Not enough to last a week, maybe not even 3 days. Her chest grew tight as fear clawed at her. The silence was not peaceful, it was a silence that seemed to listen, as if the planet itself was watching her. When darkness fell, it came quickly. The red sky dimmed into black, and the cold cut through her thin suit. She huddled near the wreck, lighting a small spark from her emergency kit. The tiny flame gave her comfort, but the shadows beyond it only grew deeper. Then she heard it. A sound, low and distant like stone grinding against stone. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart raced as she stared into the night. The noise came again, closer this time, and she saw movement, something large slipping through the dust. Claire froze. Her mind screamed to run, but her body stayed still, her eyes fixed on the dark. The shape moved with slow purpose, not like a beast, but not like a man either. A tall figure cloaked in rags, glowing eyes watching her from the distance. She whispered to herself, "No, I'm imagining it." But the figure did not fade. Step by step it drew closer, silent except for the crunch of dust beneath its feet. Her small flame flickered, as if even fire feared this stranger. Claire gripped a piece of metal from the wreck, holding it like a weapon. Though her hands shook, the figure stopped just beyond the circle of her fire. It stood there, unmoving, only its eyes catching the faint light. The silence stretched until she could no longer breathe. Finally, it tilted its head, as if curious, as if studying the weak human before it. Claire whispered, Who are you?" Her voice breaking into the night. No answer came. Only silence, deeper than before. The stranger turned its head slightly toward the broken wreck, then back to her. For a moment she thought she saw sorrow in its eyes. But then, the figure stepped back into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it came. Claire sat frozen, her body trembling, her fire burning low. Her heart pounded, not just with fear, but with a strange spark of hope. She was not alone on this world. Something, or someone, was out there in the silence, watching her, waiting. And as the long night dragged on, Claire realized the crash was only the beginning. The silence of the world was broken, and her fate was no longer hers alone. The night did not end quickly. Claire sat by the dim flame, her body cold and her heart pounding with the memory of those glowing eyes. Every sound in the wind felt like footsteps. Every shadow seemed alive. But no matter how much she strained her ears, she heard nothing more. Only the silence that returned heavier than before. When morning came, the sky was painted with a dull red light. Her flame had died out, leaving only ash and smoke. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked, and her stomach ached with hunger. Still, she forced herself to move, searching the wreck for anything useful. Each step made the wreck groan like a dying beast. metal bending and breaking as if the world itself wanted to swallow it whole. She found a small piece of glass that caught the strange sun. It was nothing, but she slipped it into her pocket, needing to cling to something, anything. She walked a little away from the crash, hoping to find water or shelter. The land stretched empty, endless dust and broken stone. No rivers, no green, no sound of life. Only silence, so deep it seemed to press against her chest, but then she saw it. A mark in the dust, large and sharp, not made by her own boots. It was a footprint, long and heavy, pressed deep into the earth. Her pulse quickened as she followed the trail, her hands shaking. The prints led toward a cluster of broken rocks, standing tall like jagged teeth. She slowed her steps, her breath shallow, her body tense. Something moved among the rocks. A shadow, tall and narrow. She took a step closer, and a sound tore through the air. A low growl, deep and angry. It was not the cloaked figure she had seen at night. It was something else, something monstrous, with scales that caught the red sun and teeth that glistened with hunger. Claire's heart nearly stopped. She stumbled back, the creature lowering itself, ready to strike. She raised her piece of metal like a weapon, though it would not save her. The beast leapt, dust exploding around its claws. But before it could reach her, another figure dropped from the rocks above. It was him, the stranger from the night. His cloak whipped through the dust as he drove a jagged spear into the creature's side. The beast screamed, thrashing, its tail cutting through the air. Claire threw herself to the ground as dust blinded her eyes. When she looked again, the battle was over. The stranger stood tall, his chest rising and falling, the beast's body broken at his feet. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Up close, he was taller than she imagined, his skin rough like stone, marked with scars. His eyes glowed faintly, not with cruelty, but with a light that seemed ancient. He turned his gaze to her, and for the first time she felt it was not a threat but a question. "Why, did you help me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He tilted his head as though her words were strange music. No sound came from his lips, but his hand moved, pointing to the wreck, then to the beast. It was simple but clear. He had helped, because she was weak, because alone she would not survive. Claire lowered the metal scrap in her hand. Her eyes softened, though fear still held her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. The stranger gave no reply, but his eyes stayed on her, studying, searching. Then, without a word, he turned and began to walk away into the dust. For a moment she thought to let him go, but the silence of the world closed in around her again, crushing her. If he left, she would not last another day. Her feet moved before her mind did, following the trail of his steps. "Wait," she called, her voice echoing strangely in the empty air. The stranger stopped. He turned, his eyes narrowing, but he did not raise his weapon. Claire swallowed hard. I can't survive here alone," she said, her voice almost a plea. The wind carried her words away, yet he seemed to understand. For a long moment, he said nothing, only stared. Then he gave the smallest nod, a gesture so slight she almost missed it. Claire felt a strange weight lift from her chest. The silence of the world was still there, heavy and endless. But now it was not hers alone. She had seen the stranger fight. She had seen him choose to save her life. And though she did not know his name, or his language, or his heart, she knew one thing. Her fate was now tied to his. And as the sun bled across the dying sky, the human woman and the alien stranger walked together into the silence, unaware that their bond had just begun. The path through the rocks stretched endless. Claire followed the alien stranger, each step heavy with dust. The silence of the world pressed against her ears, broken only by the crunch of their feet. She wanted to speak, to ask his name, to understand, but her words would mean nothing to him. So she walked quietly, watching the strange movements of his body, the way his head turned often as if he listened to things she could not hear. Hours passed beneath the red sky. The land around them was barren, cracked earth reaching to the horizon. No rivers, no trees, no sound of birds or life. The air was dry, sharp against her throat, as if the planet itself was tired of breathing. Claire felt her chest ache with the weight of this silence, a silence that was not empty but heavy, like it carried the memory of something long gone. At last the stranger stopped. He raised a hand, pointing toward a ridge of stone. Claire followed, his gaze, and saw shapes rising beyond the dust. Not mountains, not rocks, but towers, broken and leaning. Her eyes widened as she realized they were ruins, the bones of a city that once lived. They walked closer, and her heart raced. Tall walls stood shattered, great doors torn down, roads, cracked and half buried in sand. She stepped carefully, her boots echoing on the stone, and the sound felt too loud in this place of ghosts. Shattered windows stared down at her like empty eyes. She imagined voices, laughter, markets filled with life, but now only silence answered. The stranger walked ahead with slow steps, his shoulders heavy, his head lowered. Claire realized he had been here before many times. This was not discovery for him, it was memory. She saw the way his hand brushed the walls as if touching them hurt and comforted him at the same time. Finally, she dared to ask, though she knew he would not understand. "Is this your home?" she whispered. He turned his glowing eyes toward her, then back to the ruins. He gave a slow nod, just once, and Claire's heart ached. She was standing in the grave of his people, and he was the last to remember them. They passed. Through a broken square, statues lay shattered on the ground, faces of stone split and buried under dust. One half-broken carving still stood, a figure with arms outstretched to the sky. The alien stopped there, staring at it, his body still as stone. Claire stood beside him, not knowing what to say. Her silence was the only respect she could give. The ruins stretched wide. They passed old homes with crumbled walls, halls with broken arches, and gardens turned to dust. Claire touched a wall where faint carvings remained, marks of a language she could not read. She wondered about the children who had once laughed here, the families who had shared food, the lives that had filled these streets. Now only emptiness remained. It was not just a dead city. It was a dead world. Claire's throat tightened. Her own loneliness had been sharp, but now she felt his. To live day after day surrounded by the shadows of the dead, to carry the memory of an entire race, she could not imagine the weight of it, yet he had borne it and still he survived. They stopped at the center of the city where a great tower leaned, its top broken, its walls cracked, but still standing, as if refusing to fall. The alien placed his hand against the stone, his head bowed. A low sound came from him, not words, but something like a song, soft and broken. Claire's chest tightened, her eyes stung. Even without knowing the meaning, she understood. It was grief. It was remembrance. She whispered into the silence, "I'm sorry." The words were small, but they carried her heart. The alien looked at her, his glowing eyes softer, as if her sorrow had reached him. For a moment, the silence between them felt different, not empty, not heavy, but shared. The day stretched long. They found shelter in one of the broken halls, where dust lay thick and shadows gathered. Claire sat by the wall, her body weak, her stomach empty. The alien dropped something beside her, a piece of dried root, bitter but filling. She ate in silence, watching him sit across from her, his eyes lost in the shadows. That night, when the red sky faded into black, Claire lay awake. Her thoughts circled like restless birds. The silence of the empty world was no longer only the silence of death, it was also the silence between her and him. And she wondered if one day they could break it. As she closed her eyes, her last thought was not of fear, but of him, the stranger in the ruins, the last of his kind, the one who had saved her. And in that thought, she felt a fragile thread of hope, for though the world was empty, two hearts still beat within it, and perhaps that was enough to keep the silence from winning. The night inside the ruins was colder. Then the desert outside, Claire curled against the wall, her arms tight around her body. Every breath came out as a cloud of mist, and her teeth chattered with the chill. The silence of the city was deep, broken only by the soft sigh of wind slipping through cracks in the broken stone. The alien sat across from her, his glowing eyes dim, watching the darkness. He seemed untouched by the cold, though his cloak hung in shreds still. Claire felt the chill cutting into her bones, and she knew she would not last long without warmth. She tried rubbing her arms, stamping her feet, but it was useless. The air only grew sharper, biting into her skin. Finally, she pulled out her small emergency kit. Inside were a few scraps of wire, a shard of metal, and a spark tool. Her hands shook as she tried to strike it. Sparks flying into the dust. Again and again she tried until a small flame licked to life, weak but real. Her heart leapt, but before she could build it, the wind rushed through and snuffed it out, leaving her in darkness once more. Claire's chest tightened, frustration burning in her eyes. She whispered to herself, I can't survive this." The alien tilted his head, watching her with quiet curiosity. He moved closer, his long fingers brushing the shards of metal from her hand. Without a word, he gathered dry dust and fragments of cloth from the ruined hall, arranging them carefully. Claire watched, her breath caught. He struck his jagged spear against the stone, sparks flying brighter than hers had. The sparks caught on the cloth, smoke curling upward, and soon a flame grew, strong and steady. The light flickered against his scars, making his face look both fierce and gentle. Claire's eyes widened, warmth spreading into her hands, her chest, her very heart. She whispered, "Fire." Her voice, soft with awe. The alien's glowing eyes flickered as if he understood her word. He pointed at the flame, then at her as though to say, "This is for you." Claire smiled faintly, the first smile since the crash, and her chest ached with gratitude. For the first time since arriving, she felt alive, not just surviving. They sat together near the fire, its light dancing on the ruined walls. Claire broke a piece of dried ration and shared it, holding it out carefully. At first he did not move, only studied her hand. Then slowly, he took it, his rough fingers brushing hers. He ate in silence, his face unreadable, but she felt something pass between them, something small yet powerful. The night stretched long, but the fire kept the shadows away. Claire leaned against the wall, her eyes heavy, the warmth lulling her. She glanced at the alien, who still sat upright, spear resting at his side, eyes sharp on the dark beyond the flames. He was watching, guarding, making sure no beast or ghost would come near. And for the first time she closed her eyes without fear. But the peace did not last. A sound shattered the stillness, a growl, low and hungry, echoing from the street beyond. Claire's eyes flew open, her body tense. The alien rose in one fluid motion, spear in hand, his body between her and the Yao, dark. The firelight caught the movement of shadows outside, several shapes creeping closer. Claire's breath quickened. The beasts had returned, their scales glinting in the faint light, their eyes hungry. They circled the ruins, their growls rising into a chorus. The alien snarled, a sound deep and fierce answering their threat. His stance was unshaken, but Claire felt her heart slam against her ribs. One of the creatures lunged, bursting into the firelight, teeth bared. The alien struck fast, spear flashing, the beast collapsing with a cry. But more came, shadows filling the hall, claws scraping. "Stone!" Claire screamed, scrambling back against the wall. The alien fought like a storm, each strike precise, his body moving with deadly grace. Still, they were many, and he was only one. Claire's eyes darted around in panic until they fell on a jagged rock. Her hands trembled as she grabbed it, standing on shaking legs. When a beast lunged toward her, she swung with all her strength. The rock connected, and the creature fell, its body thrashing before going still. Her chest heaved, her arms shaking, but she had fought back. The alien glanced at her, his glowing eyes bright with surprise. Then another beast leapt at him, and he finished it with one swift strike. The hall fell silent again. Broken bodies scattered across the floor. The firelight flickered over them, shadows twisting on the walls. Claire dropped the rock, her legs weak, tears burning her eyes. The alien lowered his spear, breathing heavy, his body cut and bleeding. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment neither spoke. There was no need for words, for both had risked themselves to save the other. In that silence, something shifted. Something unspoken. The beasts were gone, the night cold and dark, but the fire burned on. Together they sat near it, side by side, their bodies tired, their hearts racing. The silence of the world still pressed around them, but it no longer felt the same. Because in that silence 2 lives had touched, 2 hearts had fought as one, and in the firelight, Claire felt the beginning of something new. A fragile bond that could not be broken by cold or darkness. The sun rose weak and red over the ruined city. The fire from the night still smoldered, sending small curls of smoke into the air. Claire sat with her knees drawn up, her eyes heavy, but her heart awake. Beside her, the alien cleaned his spear, his movements calm and steady, as if the battle with the beasts had been only another night for him. Her gaze lingered on him. He was scarred, his body worn by years of survival, yet there was strength. In the way he stood, strength not only in his arms but in his will. Claire whispered softly to herself, "You're still here." And the words carried more weight than she expected. The alien lifted his head, his glowing eyes turning to her. And though he spoke no word, she felt he understood. They left the hall together, stepping back into the broken streets. Dust rose under their feet and silence followed them as always. But something had changed in that silence. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of 2 survivors walking side by side, and though they could not speak the same language, their steps seemed to move in rhythm as they traveled deeper into the ruins. Claire tried again. She touched her chest and said, "Claire," her voice firm. The alien tilted his head, studying her, his eyes narrowing in thought. Slowly, he touched his chest with a hand scarred by battle and gave a low sound, deep and rough. It was not a word she could repeat, but it was his name, and it was enough. Her lips curved into a smile. She pointed to him and repeated the sound, clumsy but determined. His glowing eyes softened, and for the first time, she thought she saw something close to a smile touch his face. It was not wide, not human, but it was there, and it warmed her more than fire had day after day. They built small bridges between them. She taught him her words, showing him simple things. "Water," she said, holding up the canteen, and he repeated it in his broken way. "Food," she whispered, handing him a root. And again he tried. In return, he showed her his words, pointing to the sky, to the stone, to the beasts. Their voices clashed, stumbled, and fell, but still they tried, and slowly the silence began to break. Together they searched for what little the world could give. He showed her where bitter roots grew, in the cracks of stone, where dry plants could be burned for fire. She shared with him her tiny tools, showing him how to cut and spark with ease. They became a team, each learning, each giving. Where she was weak, he stepped forward. Where he faltered, she found a way. One evening, they sat on the steps of a broken tower, the dying sun painting the sky in blood-red light. Claire held a shard of glass from the wreck, turning it in her hand. The alien watched her, silent, his eyes glowing faintly in the dusk. She held it out to him, placing it gently in his palm. He looked at it for a long moment, then tied it to the string around his neck, wearing it as if it were treasure. Her heart tightened. Something unspoken passed between them. In that moment they were no longer only survivors, they were companions, bound not by language or race, but by the fire they had built, the dangers they had faced, and the trust that was growing stronger each day, but danger still shadowed their steps. At night, they could hear the cries of the beasts still hunting. Sometimes, strange lights flickered in the distance, like the world itself still remembered a life long gone. The alien would grip his spear tightly, his body tense, and Claire would sit close to the fire, her hand brushing the rock she used as a weapon. They were never safe, but together, They were never helpless. One night, as the cold settled heavy, Claire shivered even near the fire. The alien shifted, moving closer, his cloak wide enough to cover them both. At first she hesitated, her body stiff. But the warmth was too strong, the comfort too real. Slowly, she leaned against him, her head resting against his shoulder. His body was rough and scarred, but solid, steady, like the world itself could not move him. She closed her eyes, whispering softly, "Thank you." Though she knew he could not understand, and yet as his hand rested gently over hers, she realized he did not need the words. For in the fire's glow, in the silence of the night, their bond had grown beyond speech. It was something deeper, something written not in words but in the beating of their hearts. The world around them was broken, a dying place. But in that brokenness, something new had begun. A fragile thread, a bond between human and alien, woven with fire, silence, and trust. And though they did not yet know it, that bond would become the seed of life on this empty world. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was heavy with red clouds, the next it cracked open with violent winds. Dust swirled like knives, tearing through the ruins, rattling the broken walls. Claire clung to the alien's arm as the world roared around them, her body shaking, her breath choking on grit. The alien pulled her toward the leaning tower. Its walls groaned as the storm pressed against them, but it was the only shelter left. Inside, the darkness was thick, lit only by the faint glow of his eyes. The sound of the storm outside was deafening, as if the planet itself was screaming. Claire pressed her hands over her ears, but still she heard it. The cry of a dying world. They waited through the endless hours. The roof cracked, stone falling in sharp pieces. When the storm finally calmed, the tower was broken, their fire drowned in dust, their supplies buried under rubble. Claire's chest ached with despair. She thought of the wreck, of Earth, of rescue, but there was none. Only silence and ruins. The alien stood tall even in the wreckage. He lifted stones with steady hands, clearing a space for them. Claire tried to help, her arms weak but determined. Together they uncovered a doorway hidden beneath the rubble, a path leading down. Hope flickered in her chest, and without words they stepped into the unknown. The passage led them into the earth. The air was cooler, damp, carrying a faint smell, not of dust but of soil. Claire's heart raced. Soil meant life. Her hands brushed the walls as they walked, and soon the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. There, broken light filtered through cracks in the ceiling, falling on something green. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Plants, small but alive, clung to the earth, their roots tangled, deep in the soil. In the middle of the chamber was a pool of water, clear and shining in the dim light. Her knees buckled, tears stinging her eyes. After endless dust and silence, here was life, fragile but real. The alien stepped forward, his glowing eyes soft. He knelt by the plants, his rough fingers brushing their leaves as though they were sacred. For a moment, his face changed. No longer only sorrow, but wonder. Claire dropped to her knees beside him, dipping her hands into the pool. Cool water slipped through her fingers and she drank deeply, her body filling with new strength. The silence here was different. It was not the silence of death, but of waiting, of possibility. She looked at the alien, and in his eyes she saw the same thought. This place was not only survival, it was a beginning. Claire's mind turned quickly. Seeds could be planted, roots could spread, food could grow. She remembered Earth, her mother's small garden, the smell of fresh soil after rain. She pressed her hand to the dirt and whispered, "We can live here." The alien tilted his head, not understanding the words, but her gesture was clear. But with that hope came the sharp edge of choice, for in her heart she still dreamed of rescue, of seeing Earth again, yet she knew if rescue ever came, it would not come soon, perhaps not at all. If she waited only for that, she would wither like the ruins above. If she stayed, if she chose this place, she and the alien could bring life back to the dying world. She stared at him, her heart heavy. He was watching her, waiting, as though he too sensed the path before them. Her mind whispered of loneliness, of fear, of never seeing home again. But her heart whispered louder of fire shared in the cold, of battles fought side by side, of trust grown in silence. And in that chamber, with water at her feet and green before her eyes, she felt the answer. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I choose this." The alien's glowing eyes widened, his chest rising and falling. For a long moment he stared at her. Then slowly, he pressed his hand over hers. It was not language, but it was understanding. Together they knelt in the soil. They touched the plants as though planting a promise. And though the world above lay broken, though the ruins stood in silence, in this chamber beneath the earth something new had begun. A choice not of survival alone, but of life. That night, as they lit a new fire by the pool, Claire looked into the flames, her chest no longer heavy with despair but filled with a fragile hope. The silence of the world had not ended, but she no longer feared it, because she had chosen not to wait for rescue, not to live only in memory. She had chosen to build with him, with the last of his kind, and in her heart she knew, on this dying world, their love would bring new life. The days after their choice were not easy. Every morning, Claire and the alien woke in the hidden chamber, the air cool, the pool of water shining in the dim light. She would rise first, touching the soil, reminding herself that it was real, that life could grow here. The alien would watch her, his glowing eyes calm, then join her in tending to the fragile plants. Together they worked, hands in the dirt, sharing silence that no longer felt heavy, but full. Claire remembered the gardens of earth. She showed him how to press the seeds into the soil, how to pour water gently so roots would not drown. He showed her where to find stones that held heat for the night, where to lay them near the plants to keep the cold away. They shared knowledge without words, teaching each other through action, through touch, through patience. Every green sprout that rose was a victory. Every drop of water saved was a promise. Above ground, the world was still dying. The ruins stood broken, the sky painted with endless red. The beast still prowled in the night, but below in the chamber something new lived. The silence was broken by the sound of water dripping, leaves rustling, fire crackling. For the first time, the world whispered not of death but of life. As days became weeks, their bond deepened. Claire no longer flinched at his touch, and he no longer watched her with only caution. They shared food, laughter without words, and long moments where they simply sat together, listening to the quiet. She learned the glow of his eyes softened when he was at peace, and he learned the sound of her laughter meant safety. Though their languages were still broken, their hearts spoke clearly. One night the firelight flickered against the walls. Claire sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. She whispered softly, "We're building a new world, aren't we?" He turned his head toward her, his glowing eyes reflecting the flames. He touched the soil beside them, then her hand, and gave a single nod. It was not just survival anymore. It was creation, but the world did not give life easily. The storm returned, shaking the ruins, sending dust down into the chamber. They fought off more beasts, their claws striking, their cries echoing. In the dark once, Claire was thrown to the ground, her chest burning with fear, but the alien pulled her back, his body shield against the storm of teeth. And once, he stumbled with wounds bleeding, but Claire dragged him to the pool, pressing cloth to his cuts until the bleeding slowed. Each battle left them tired, scarred, but closer than before. Through hardship, love bloomed. It was not sudden, not loud, but quiet and steady like the growth of roots in soil. Claire would look at him and see not just the last of his kind, but her protector, her partner, her heart. And when he looked at her, she felt it in the way he stayed close, the way he always placed himself between her and danger, the way his eyes softened in the fire's glow. Their bond was unspoken but unbreakable. Time passed, and the chamber changed. Sprouts became plants, green spreading where once there had been only dust. The pool shone brighter, as if the water itself had woken to their hope. Claire knelt one morning, her hands trembling as she saw the first blossom. Bloom, a small flower, fragile yet alive, opening its petals toward the light. Tears filled her eyes, her heart swelling with joy. She called softly, "Look." And though he could not understand the word, he came kneeling beside her, his glowing eyes wide with wonder. Together they touched the flower, and in that moment, it was more than just a plant. It was proof that the world was not dead, that even in ruin, life could return. Claire pressed her forehead to his chest, and he placed his hand gently on her back. Two survivors, human and alien, holding each other in the cradle of new life. That night, under the broken sky, they climbed the ruins together. From the highest tower, they looked out at the endless desert, the silence stretching far. But in their hearts, the silence no longer felt empty. It was a canvas, waiting to be filled. Claire whispered, "A new dawn," her voice soft. The alien lifted his face to the red sky, his eyes glowing brighter than the stars. They had no rescue ship, no great army, no promise of tomorrow. All they had was each other, fire, soil, water, and hope. Yet that was enough. For where once there had been only silence and death, now there was love. And in that love, a dying world began to breathe again.